Hello, and welcome to Anime Audio Commentary. Today I'll be commenting on episode 9 of Don't Toy With Me, Miss Nagatoro, Second Attack. If you'd like to watch along, then start watching now. Now, last we left off, there was something about an impending judo tournament that Senpai sort of decided he would take part in. And there was some, issue about Nagatoro not being all into judo that much anymore, seeing as how her skills plateaued, but I guess she's sort of getting back into it, if only because Senpai is displaying some level of interest. There was also another girl who sort of showed up in the background once or twice, so I'm wondering if maybe she has something to do with any of this. So I guess based on the title here, nobody really expects Senpai to do all that well at judo. If you just win once, that's okay. And I guess considering how good he was at judo before, maybe one victory is a reasonable goal to strive towards. I do find it interesting that, more than just Gamo, at least in terms of Nagatoro's friends, are getting involved, I mean, I don't know, judo doesn't seem like it would necessarily be, I guess, a sort of activity a whole bunch of girls would be into, I'm almost reminded somewhat of Dragon Ball in a weird sort of way, where, a group of people enter a tournament and they all sort of make it past the first round and they're like, hey, you guys passed too. How about that? I expected nothing less and all that. But of course, I guess with Nagatoro and her friends, they all know what they're doing, so it's only reasonable that they would likely pass. Senpai, on the other hand, it's not clear whether or not anything he's learned is actually going to bear fruit. Now, I do believe we've seen this girl before, so she, as I understand it, was that other name on the tournament bracket Nagatoro was looking at dejectedly. And at the same time, I believe Senpai ran into her before when he was trying to return Nagatoro's phone. So it seems like things are getting interesting, you know. There are characters here with, I guess, intersecting motivations, or... motivation probably isn't the right word, you know. They know each other from a variety of different events. So it seems like even though Gamo got it handed to her, her opponent really knows what she's doing, which indicates to me that she was probably the person that put Nagatoro in her place way back when. You know, that whole sort of story about, you know, my skills sort of plateaued and I kind of gave it up. So this was sort of the thing that Nagatoro was dreading, you know. It's going to be a rematch against a person she could never win against. And, you know, she hasn't necessarily been keeping up on judo as I understand it, so... Alright, so Gamma makes an interesting point, you know. If nothing else, Nagatoro's going to want to put on a good show for Senpai, whether or not she's willing to sort of admit to being motivated by that. Alright, so that's interesting. Nagatoro wasn't really all that interested in actually talking to her or doing anything, but the other girl seemed rather friendly. And the upshot of all of this is that Nagatoro is like, oh, you know, maybe I'll just forfeit, which certainly does seem to be out of character. So, you know, this makes me think that perhaps the story she told before wasn't exactly complete, and that, I don't know, there might be something else going on. And I guess it only makes sense that Nagatoro is not necessarily willing to divulge all the information right now, especially if it's something personal. Alright, so this is sort of stuff we already knew. Nagatoro had, I guess, natural talent. And so she was sort of good from an early age, you know, winning tournaments, beating all her peers and all that. Now I'm wondering if this is another instance of Nagatoro perhaps going too far. I'm wondering. Although, from the other girl's perspective, this is essentially working hard to overcome a person who's always been better than you. I guess it's interesting that we're seeing this sympathetically from the other side when it would normally be the reverse. It is rather unfortunate that, you know, merely losing like that was enough to sort of extinguish her passion for judo. You know, especially if it's something that she really seemed to like, but I guess the idea here is that she must not have really liked it all that much if losing was enough to sort of stop that. I'm glad Senpai's saying what we're all thinking here. You know, Nagatoro's not acting like herself. Alright, here we go. You know, all those vertebrae he has, they're finally, you know, pulling everything together. Like, she's rebuking him, saying, like, you know, don't talk to me like you know me, but I feel like she shouldn't have told him that story if, she didn't want his input in that manner. Alright, there we go, Senpai. Even if he is sort of stuttering his way through it, I think he did manage to say the right thing and stick by it. Yeah, well, sometimes you can't win for trying. Even if you do manage to encourage Nagatoro, all that'll do is get her to tease you again. Granted, I feel like she's making a bet she doesn't necessarily want to keep. It's like the idea here is that he has to win at least one match in order to earn a kiss. And I feel like that's definitely more to tease him than anything, but there's definitely gotta be an ulterior motive, even if she's not necessarily willing to go through it when the time actually comes. That said, Senpai's opponent definitely has a far more impressive physique. I mean, surely there's no way he can win unless this is like a real, David versus Goliath kind of story. Well, at least in broad strokes. I'd imagine if Senpai were to win, it would be purely accidental. Well, I guess if nothing else, Senpai wasn't immediately thrown. He managed to stand his ground for a little bit before being put in the ground. It's not exactly a sterling result, but it's better than nothing. Alright, so that's a little interesting. Nagatoro's a little too embarrassed to actually cheer for Senpai outright. Oh, come on, Nagatoro. Just cheer for him a little bit, That'll encourage him. Now, I definitely don't know much about judo, but I feel like, given some of the commentary, like the Royal Strength stuff, that's not the proper way to do it. And generally speaking, as I understand it, technique can outweigh raw strength. So, if Senpai is going to win this, I'd imagine he'd probably have to, take advantage of his smaller stature. Sort of like using the strength of his opponent against him with better leverage and technique. And I guess ultimately, he's actually applying the lessons Nagatoro taught him to break out of a hold. Now, I'd imagine, in a perfect world, Senpai would thank her specifically for teaching him this, and she would be gratified for having done so. But I don't know. I think the more likely scenario is that somebody's going to say, hey, Nagatoro, didn't you teach him that? And she'll get all embarrassed. No, you know what? I take that back. This is better. She's feeling pride for having taught Senpai something and for him to have applied it successfully. You know what? I can dig it. There we go, Senpai, he's actually doing it against all odds, You don't have to be the stronger person, you just have to know what you're doing. So you know what? Senpai might not have actually won this bout, but if nothing else, I think that was still a pretty impressive showing. I mean, he did sort of force Nagatoro to cheer for him against her better judgment. So, Senpai still lost, but it wasn't a complete blowout. He earned the respect of his opponent, and in all likelihood, the respect of his peers and Nagatoro, I mean, sure, he may or may not actually win that bet, but I don't know. I'd say he won out in the end pretty reasonably. Yeah, there we go. Nagatoro's starting to feel like her old self again. And I feel like perhaps that meaningful look between her and Senpai wasn't lost on her friends. So I guess this is the all-important match. Now, I'm not entirely sure where things are going to go. It seems like everything's kind of setting up Nagatoro for a win, if only because that would be a satisfying narrative. But at the same time, she's also sort of intimated that she would be maybe not okay with losing, but she could accept it ultimately. Alright, so that's actually interesting. They're describing Orihara as being a sort of representative for Japan. Whether that means like national level competition or Olympic level competition is unclear, but if she could be an Olympic athlete and she's just sort of, competing with other high school students, that seems a little unfair. But fortunately for Nagatoro, she was very nearly, I guess, thrown without contest. I don't know how the points work, how the scoring works and all that, but Nagatoro seemed to have been able to turn around a bad situation into, like, a marginal loss rather than something really bad. Alright, so now everybody's cheering for Orihara. I'd imagine this has to weigh on Nagatoro a little bit. So, if nothing else, this is a golden opportunity for Senpai to make his voice heard. Now, I guess it's only natural that perhaps his exclamation might have an adverse effect. Whether or not this will actually throw her off her game, it kind of remains to be seen. And if nothing else, I do find all the footwork very interesting. It seems like there's a lot of intricate movement that goes into it. Alright, so that's a bit of a bummer. We don't actually get to see what happened. Alright, well, I guess it kind of makes sense, it was a loss by disqualification, out of bounds and all that. I don't know, that's probably like a good middle ground, Nagatoro won based on skill, and therefore she gets to feel superior, but she lost, and, she didn't mar her opponent's record, and her opponent had, I guess, good grace in being the winner. And I guess Nagatoro sort of managed to get over her rut, because she really only lost on a technicality. I mean, normally one would think that losing on a technicality would be worse than just losing, but I feel like, seeing as how the crux of Nagatoro's issue was the disparity in skill, that she was only able to lose by virtue of being out of bounds, that's gotta be somewhat encouraging. Ooh boy, that's a real bombshell. Nagatoro's offering that wager of a kiss again. And Senpai thought to maybe, call her out on it, stop teasing me, but, she made it clear she's not messing around. Alright, well that's it for this episode. If you've enjoyed it, then by all means, tune in for the next one. See you, Space Cowboy.